Alrighty, let's take a look at Unit 5, imperialism. So we're going to go from Washington to World War I. So Washington's time, late 1700s, World War I is 1914. Here, review questions. If you don't have them, pause. There's going to be some handouts you're going to get that are tied to these review questions, so you have to sort of use the handouts to answer the questions. So the roots of imperialism. So you have Washington, and what he did is he warned of what was called foreign entanglements. During the American Revolution, France helped us out a great deal. And Washington was concerned that France would say that we owed them one or something like that. And if we partnered with France, what would our relationship with Britain look like? Because it is kind of funny, after we fought and killed British troops, shortly after we resumed trade with Britain. And we had other sort of problems with Britain. They would steal our sailors and stuff like that when we were out on ships. And if we allied ourselves with France, he was worried about problems like that getting worse. So this is what you called isolationist, where we don't engage with other countries. That way we just stay neutral. It can get expensive. Our military polices the world in many ways, and that's expensive. Our taxes pay for that. You have diplomacy, and diplomacy is basically talking out your problems before you go to war. Hamilton, though, in Washington's time, he's on the $10 bill. He said one of the best ways to avoid war is to go into debt with one another. So basically, the U.S. government borrows money from France or borrows money from Britain, and you try to get Britain to borrow money from the United States. And that incentivizes a country from going to war with another nation because you just cancel that debt. So like the United States and China are in debt to one another, and we're really big trade partners, and that will keep us out of war with each other because the cost of going to war is going to be a lot larger than cutting off trade and canceling debt, so we don't go to war. Then you have James Monroe, and he came up with what you call the Monroe Doctrine. And he said that the United States has a sphere of influence, and so we pretty much claim the entirety of the Western Hemisphere. Just, we say we cut the globe in half, and the entirety of the Pacific and South America. When we said this, other countries were like, oh, how cute. But they didn't really push us around and try, like poke you in the shoulder and say, oh, look, big, bad United States, pretending that, that they can put up a fight against one of us. We didn't really get pushed around for it. So that allowed us to kind of grow into the military juggernaut we are today. And then Jackson, we don't really consider Native Americans foreign people, but they were treated as foreigners by the U.S. government to a certain extent. So let's talk about doctrines, how basically a doctrine is under a certain president, how are we going to deal with other countries? So obviously you have the Monroe Doctrine, and you have Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt came up with what you call big stick diplomacy. Basically, be this big, bad guy that no one wants to screw with, and you just tell people, I wouldn't advise that. My dad used to do collections for a company, so a customer would owe this business money, and my dad would call the person who owed money and say, hey, we need money, da-da-da-da-da, or we need what you owe us. And hopefully the guy paid up. And my dad heard of a collection company that would hire big, bad mean-looking bikers to roll up on a business and with a loud motorcycle and go in and say, hey, you owe so-and-so money. You better pay up. It wasn't a threat. They didn't threaten. But the fact that they were these big, bad, scary-looking bikers, the person probably took it as a threat, but it really wasn't a threat. So that's big stick diplomacy. And this is where you start to get what you call imperialism. Imperialism is going into someone else's country and trying to control it economically or politically to strip it of its resources. So Teddy Roosevelt set up Navy bases throughout the Pacific and also in South America. We created the Panama Canal. So it used to be that you have to go all the way around South America to get from the east side of the United States to the west side of the United States. Well, there was a strip of land that's really narrow. I mean, you could look at it on any map, where basically Panama is today. Panama used to be Colombia, and you had northern Colombians who didn't like the rest of Colombia. So we helped the northern Colombians rebel against the rest of Colombia, and we helped create the country of Panama. And in exchange, we dug this huge ditch, and we were able to cut, 8,000 miles off of a trip, which saves money. If for some reason you go to war with Britain, you can send your ships from the west side to the east side really easily. Britain was in China, so if you have ships in the east and you need to send them west, you could do it in a day instead of doing it in weeks. And you have what's called the Roosevelt Corollary. The Roosevelt Corollary added to the Monroe Doctrine, and basically the Monroe Doctrine was like Europe can't screw around in the in what we call our sphere of influence. So Roosevelt pretty much said, hey, you know what, if Europe is bullying people in South America, we have the right to intervene with South America. Our intervention, whether or not it was beneficial to the people being bullied, that's a different conversation, but it sort of extended the Monroe Doctrine that we're going to use our military to police bullying. Next up, you have President Taft. Taft used what was called dollar diplomacy. And with dollar diplomacy, it's essentially you're going to pay other countries to see things your way. So let's say you're C&H Sugar. So, if you go to the grocery store, you see the pink and white bag, it says C&H Sugar. They were around this time. Let's say that C&H Sugar wants to be in a country and produce sugar. The United States will go and make a deal with the country to say, hey, you know what? C&H Sugar wants to set up farms. Here's money, and you're going to allow them to do it. And the people receiving the money were like, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. So that's dollar diplomacy. You basically pay another country to see things your way. Then Wilson came up with moral diplomacy. So, we're all about democracy and stuff like that. So Wilson was like, any place in South America where we feel that democracy is being threatened, we'll intervene. So this led us to intervene all over South America, Central America, and Mexico. We actually occupied Mexico for a short while because we felt that there were threats to democracy and we were trying to establish democracy. So it's important to note that all of these doctrines sort of add up and are continually used as reasons to intervene in other countries. So we talked about diplomacy being talking it out. Let's talk about war, where you fight it out. You kind of think of it like, you try to de-escalate a situation. If someone doesn't agree with you or they're pushing you around, you try to use your words, but if words fail you, you go to war. So you can break down war. We had what were called stalemates, where both sides kind of walked away limping. One was the American Revolution, ended in a stalemate. Britain just gave up, but they still poked at us a bit. You had the War of 1812, where Britain tried to get back at us in 1812, burnt down the capital, but we ended up pushing them back, and they gave up again. We didn't win. We didn't take over Britain. Britain didn't take over us. It's a stalemate. The Civil War, I mean, if you want to get into it, the South thought that they were a different country. The North felt you're not a different country. And the Civil War sort of ended in a stalemate. We reunited the country, but you still have the South who are, really kind of ticked off about their situation and kept, poking it, mainly harassing black people. And I would go so far as to say harassment is a incredibly insulting way to put it when you murder them. But they continued poking, and so that became a stalemate. Sometimes it's said that the Civil War didn't end when the Civil War ended. It continued in a different way. And then you have expansionary wars. So the Mexican-American War in 1825 was 1849 Mexican-American War was an expansionary war. We wanted to push our border south and west, and Mexico felt that that wasn't going to happen, and we ended up winning, and that's why we have Texas, California, and all that good stuff. We also wanted to occupy the Caribbean. There were, sugar. Sugar is great. It's probably the one legal drug that everyone's addicted to. That and probably caffeine. But it is completely legal, everyone for all ages, and we are completely addicted to it. Well, the Spanish-American War was really about business interests. We wanted to secure the Caribbean away from European powers like the Spanish. And we took Cuba and, for some reason, the Philippines, even though that really had nothing to do with our immediate interest. We just wanted to expand across the Pacific and secure that territory, mainly so we could push up against Britain and France and what they had going on in Asia. And then wars that maintained democracy. So World War I was a war to maintain democracy. World War II as well. So imperialism itself, what is it? It is a political and economic control for the purpose of extraction of raw materials. Why? Economic incentives. People are willing to buy sugar. You put sugar in everything, people are willing to buy it. But we don't grow sugar in the United States. Sugar is grown somewhere else. So it's kind of the idea that what is our sugar doing in your country, and we are going to go get that sugar. Power and prestige. Britain and France used to go to war with each other for centuries to prove who was the big bad country. Well, eventually it became too expensive, and they decided on, instead of becoming the big bad country by going to war with each other, the big bad country means how rich you are, how much land you occupy, how many other countries do you occupy. Basically, like, you could be poor and fight and be this big bad guy, but what's better than being poor and fighting is being rich and having cool toys. That's like you look at rappers or something like that. When they were poor, they probably got into fights, but now that they're rich, they're not getting into fights anymore. They're trying to be awesome by showing how much bling they have. Oh, I'm probably showing my age there, calling it bling. So the United States was kind of late to the party. We didn't really become imperialistic until 1880, 1890, probably closer to 1890. And yeah, we were late to the party and we wanted to catch up, and catch up we did. Social Darwinism. It's this idea that we've talked about it before, but social Darwinism used for imperialism is you're basically shirtless wearing a diaper and you're sitting on all this gold and you're not using it correctly. Or you have all this sugar growing and you're not farming it. Let us teach you how to farm it. Look at you. You don't even know how to farm it. That's stupid. Do things our way. Oh, you're going to fight us on it? Don't fight us on it. You guys are stupid. You don't know what you're doing, and we will kill you. And look at how efficiently and effectively we kill you. I mean, you guys really need to see things our way. And if you don't, you'll become extinct. And I mean, it will really be no big loss if you do, because you guys are useless. You guys are worthless. We'd rather turn you into us. But when we turn you into us, we're not really going to call you us. You're still going to be a lower life form, but at least you're useful. That would be social Darwinism applied to imperialism. So here's kind of pictorially new markets. So you can see imports and exports during the time of imperialism just absolutely just went nuts. This is where you get rubber from. You get it from trees, so rubber for tires. Spider silk. This is where you get silk. Tea. This is where you get tea from Asia. Heroin. Poppy fields. That's what heroin comes from, a plant, and that's the plant. You just milk these suckers and you get liquid and smoke it, apparently. I don't know how to make heroin. If I did, I still wouldn't do it. So, you know, it's not like Breaking Bad or something like that. It's not like I don't know how to make meth, but if I did, I'd make meth. Nothing like that. But yeah, this is where you get heroin from. It's grown in Afghanistan and eastern China. This is indigo. Coloring clothes was cool. If, you know, why have a white shirt when you can have a blue shirt? I want a blue shirt. A little bit more expensive. Shows how blingy you are. Keep using that term if it's lame. If this video lasts for 20 years, I'll really show my age. Military and strategic interests. So we occupied all of these areas in here and went to war trying to establish these. Sometimes we'd fight the natives, like I explained with the whole social Darwinism thing. But we did this to kind of put pressure, because Britain, France, Germany were all in this area, mostly Britain. And, you know, Spain was in this area, but we wanted to establish our dominance within our sphere of influence. And we started establishing our sphere of influence. It's one thing to say, hey, this is my toy. And someone's like, yeah, right, I could take that from you just so easily. And then it's another thing to say, hey, this is my toy, and be able to punch that person in the face and put them on the ground to establish that that exactly is your toy. What's funny about imperialism is, you know, you can call this foreign policy, how we deal with foreign nations. And our foreign policy looks a lot like what you'd observe on a elementary school playground, or really a middle school playground. You can call it juvenile, but it really is. I mean, if you think about it, you get suspended for fighting, but the United States doesn't get suspended from fighting. You try to talk it out, but then you throw a punch and you'll get punished for it, but the United States doesn't get punished for it. So you can call it like a double standard. But when you become a country, double standards don't really exist. The Great White Fleet. Oh man, I love Roosevelt. Speak softly and carry a big stick. Our big stick was the Great White Fleet. We are going to make the best, most advanced ships the world has ever seen, and we will paint them white. We will paint them a reflective color. But sir, won't that make us, we can't sneak up on our enemy. Oh, we're not going to sneak up. They'll see us coming a mile away, and we will be intimidating. That was the strategy behind the Great White Fleet. So if you saw us coming, that meant you were in trouble, and you better back down. That's the speak softly. You see us coming, you better change your behavior. And then social Darwinist thinking, you can kind of see how the European is in the middle, and then you have like, we divvied up the races. The idea of race doesn't exist biologically. I mean, we're just all genetic mutants. Black people have more melanin. I mean, and you know, their hair grows out differently. Doesn't mean they're a different species or a different race. It's just a mutation. But we called it a different race. And we still use race today when it's really biologically meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. It only means something because we use it in a discriminatory way. That's really how race started. We wanted to differentiate what makes these brown people less superior than us, you know, all of that stuff. So race itself was a product of racism. The white man's burden. It's this idea that look at us, the United States, and we have to teach these natives, we have to teach these different subhuman races how to be like us. And oh my God, that's so much work. I just wish they'd see things our way. I mean, why do they have to be just, they just don't, you know, they just make it tough on us. Oh, okay, you want to use your land the way you want. You're not using it effectively and you're dumb. I mean, God, the work we have to put in and you fight us for it. That's the white man's burden. I'm not saying that because I believe it. Please don't insinuate that. I'm just trying to put myself in the position of someone who, you know, is an imperialist. And here's the United States being carried around by the people that they're abusing. Britain. So when you see it, France is right back there. He has a goofy mustache. Britain always has a top hat and is fat. And then Uncle Sam is Uncle Sam, U.S. And we literally did ride foreign people. Whoops. It's ridiculous. And I mean, this guy's smiling like, oh, this is all fun and games. And she's like, nah, dude, like, we're going to the store. You know, so I mean, it's like, oh yeah, hey, you know, hey, take a picture. Ha ha ha. Not, we're going to abuse you and not feel guilt about it. So how did we imperialize? So how did we maintain control? We'd colonize, and you can call us like colonizers or imperialists. The general term that you could use is colonizer. But the first way we colonized was incredibly expensive. That's where you send your own people over and turn them into the labor force to take raw materials from a foreign land and bring them back over. The American Revolution taught the world that colonizing that way is just not worth it. You can't turn your own people into, I don't want to say slaves, but you know, you can't abuse them like that. They're not going to put up with it. So you create what's called a protectorate. I like to use the analogy of, you know, like a sphere of influence is, you know, in high school, there's maybe who am I going to ask out for prom? And you have 3 different girls that you might want to ask out for prom, but you haven't decided yet. So you're kind of feeling them out, you know, where are they at? So your sphere of influence is those 3 girls. So if anyone else tries to swoop in, you could do the manly thing and be like, no, dude, back off. This is my group of girls. I'm going to sort of suss out and figure out who's interested. So that is also your protectorate. You're going to protect them from influence from outside. No, dude, I haven't made the decision, but I have dibs. So you're overseen by an imperial power. You're the imperialist, and these three girls are overseen. That is your sphere of influence. So they're kind of used interchangeably. But a sphere of influence is, these are my three girls, and a protectorate would be, I'm going to throw down if you talk to one of the three. Don't you love how sexist this sounds? It's untouched by others, but it's ours. Paternalism. Paternalism is sort of a different thing, so this is where the analogy kind of falls apart. You make the country dependent upon you, and there are a number of ways to do this. One way would be, you make something, you create like tea. You can't eat tea. So in China, what Britain did is they made these expansive tea fields that replaced food fields. And for food, they depended on Britain and their system to feed them. And if the Chinese tried to rebel or something like that, the Chinese would experience less food. They wouldn't have as much food if they put up a fight. So you make the colonized country dependent upon you and your system. They become economically dependent. Assimilation. You make them like you, not like love you, but you make them look like you, speak like you. You send them to schools, dress like you. And by doing that, you change their identity. And it takes a while. It's usually you focus on young people doing this and children who don't know any better, and they just pick it up without knowing what their history was. You kind of destroy their history and their culture, and they don't know what anything else is, so they have nothing to anchor to aside from you. So it's kind of a paternalistic as well. And then geopolitics. Geopolitics is basically choosing where you're going to colonize or imperialize based upon the geography. We ignored Guatemala for Panama because Panama, we could cut through the land and create the Panama Canal. Guatemala, it's like, yeah, whatever. You're Guatemala, you're over there. We're not gonna pay too much attention to you. However, in the 1970s, we paid attention to Guatemala. We grew bananas there, Chiquita bananas. And Guatemala was tired of how they were being treated by their dictatorships, so they overthrew the dictatorship. And the United States sent troops in to smash the Guatemalan uprising and reinstate a dictator. And it was because the banana production was threatened. So that's geopolitics. If anything pops up, it's like, think of like whack-a-mole, where you have the mallet and something pops up and you hit it and then you get little tickets, anything pops up, we're then interested in doing something about it. So it's basically decisions based on geography, or you can't grow bananas in Washington State. So if you want bananas, you're going to have to do it in South America. We're going to do an imperialism presentation, so you can go ahead and skip over this. That's something different. Yellow journalism, we're going to talk about this when it comes to World War I. Yellow journalism, today you would call it fake news. Yellow journalism is basically different literary tactics to sell newspapers. Yellow journalism started with William Randolph Hearst, one of the richest newspapermen in the United States. And you also had Joseph Pulitzer, who was also a newspaperman. And they were competing for newspaper sales, so they would stretch the truth in order to sell newspapers. They weren't necessarily interested in telling a factual story. They were interested in making money. So the Maine, we'll talk about this like later, but there was an explosion in the Maine, and a ship in Havana Harbor exploded. And Hearst, his newspaper said it was caused by a bomb or torpedo, question mark. Well, that gets people thinking that it was either a bomb or torpedo, when in fact it wasn't either. It was the engine exploded. So when you give people two options, they're going to think, oh, we were attacked. No, we weren't. It had a faulty engine and it exploded. So here's one, $50,000 reward, which back then would be like $500,000. Destruction of warship Maine was the work of an enemy. No, it wasn't. But if somebody offers a $500,000 reward to find the person responsible for destroying the Maine, my God, there must be someone out there who did it. Because look at how much money this person is offering in order to find somebody who doesn't exist, which is pretty genius because they'll never pay the $500,000 because it was caused by an engine explosion. It wasn't a bomb or torpedo. So you never pay the money, but you insinuate that someone is responsible for the destruction. And when Trump says that fake news is a problem, it is. It is a problem. Who he accuses of producing fake news is a different story. But the problem of there being fake news, it is a problem. Anytime, newspapers stay in business or newspapers or online magazines or whatever the case may be, CNN, Fox News, whatever the case. They stay in business because they have to make money. They make money by selling stories. The stories that sell sometimes are the ones that are sensational or exaggerate. So that kind of tells you that things are going to be exaggerated. It's like this was a current thing. So the 2018 midterm elections, you have this Honduran caravan, and you saw the news run about this Honduran caravan that is going to jump the U.S. border, and we're going to be infiltrated by illegal immigrants. Those news stories kind of disappeared after the election was over. Well, wait, was it a problem or not? I guess it's not a problem anymore. Is it not a problem because the elections are over? Because if it was a problem before the elections, it should still be a problem after the elections. But when it's not being reported on, I guess it's not a problem anymore. Was it ever a problem in the first place? So, I think one thing that is really, really important for you is to be able to take what people are telling you and understand why they are telling you this. What is their angle in telling you this? Because if you have a news source telling you something, remember that their first priority is to make money. And they make money by making you pay attention. You're going to tune in more to their news source and participate more in their, business if they capture your attention. But by capturing your attention, could they be selling you fake news? Absolutely. Just like right here with yellow journalism, none of this actually happened, but people bought it and Hearst made money off of fiction, pretending to be fact. So you guys are going to do a project, but I'll skip over that. So World War I, you discussed this in world history, but we'll talk about it again. What was the cause of World War I? First one was militarism. Hey, look at how big and bad we were. The United States did this too, our great white fleet. And then alliances. In Europe, they aligned themselves with, certain countries. So like, let's say you have a friend, but your friend is really mouthy, and you always have to have your friend's back. So your friend mouths off to the wrong person and gets into a fight. You're obligated to jump in and defend your friend as well, even though he's mouthy. It's like, why am I obligated to jump in and defend you when you're the one who's picking fights? Industrialization, we had all these cool new machines. Let's go use them and how can we figure out new ways to kill each other, basically. Nationalism, oh, look at how cool we are, look at how awesome we are. Let's see who's better. And imperialism, this overseas competition, another way to see how cool we are. So it's kind of like we came full circle. On the one hand, we went to wars, Britain and France and all that would go to war with each other to show how awesome they were. And then we stopped doing this to see how big and bad we were, with industrialization and imperialism. Look at how much we own. And then we kind of came full circle and went to war with each other again. Basically because we bought all the toys we could, and there's really no other way to show how awesome we were. So I like to say that the causes of World War I were many, and that's cringy. I'll admit that. So we'll go over this in class. You'll take notes on it. U.S. side of World War I, from neutrality to war. We were isolationist, and we didn't actually send troops over until we felt threatened. But we did trade with these countries, and it's really interesting. You probably do this with your sibling, if you have siblings, where you want to cause a fight because you want to beat them up. But to cause that fight, you can't be the one who starts it. Like, you hit me first. Well, I didn't hit you first. You hit me first. And then it's like, well, what did you do to make them hit you? Nothing. And then your sibling's like, no, he was putting his finger in my face saying, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. So that's kind of what we did with Germany. If you take a look at the geography or geopolitics of the United States and Europe, when it comes to trade, Britain and France are a lot closer than Germany. So we're not going to side with Germany in trade because we have to go past Britain and France. Britain and France will sink our ships or block us or something or other. So that naturally made Britain and France our trading partners. But we're trading war material. Now, one of the first rules in war is, the first rule is, what is the other side playing with? What can they kill you with? So the second rule of war is to take out supply lines. So Germany started taking out supply lines. So we'd send military ships with trade ships, and we started this convoy system, this protection system, and that was to discourage Germany from firing upon us or firing upon these merchant ships, because sinking a merchant ship is one thing, but trying to sink one of our war vessels is a completely different story. That's an act of war. So we're kind of like poking them in the face or putting our finger in their face like, we're not touching you, we're not touching you. Conscription, basically the draft. We were occupying Mexico, and at the time, President Wilson, drafted 1 million men and expanded our military. We were isolationists, so it's kind of like, why do we need 1 million men to occupy Mexico? In truth, we didn't. But Wilson saw that the war in Europe could bleed over to us, and he wanted to be prepared, basically. And that was our preparation. You can't send over people who've never shot a gun to go shoot guns in Europe. You got to basically force them into the military and train them to shoot guns first. And for the people who've never shot a gun, if you've never shot a gun, you could be totally anti-gun and shoot a gun, and there's going to be a certain part of you that's going to be like, oh, that was cool. I'm not anti-gun, but I grew up around guns, and shooting guns is kind of cool. I think a lot of people would say that shooting guns is kind of cool. And back then, a lot of people had never shot a gun or shot a machine gun or a rifle or got to ride in a tank, and they thought it was pretty cool. So even though they were forced into the military, they're like, dude, this is kind of cool. The Lusitania and the Zimmerman note. So the Lusitania, ooh, that's kind of a muddy story. The Lusitania was like a cruise ship. You know, if you hear of like cruises to Alaska or something like that, like a Carnival cruise line. They were very simplistic back then. The ships weren't as big, and you didn't have water slides and stuff on it. But basically, it was a British ship, came to the United States to pick up American passengers to go back to Britain. Now, Germany, here's the deal. Somehow, war material was sneaking into Britain and France, and Germany knew it. They were sinking merchant ships, but somehow the amount of guns and other material coming across increased. Well, how could it increase if we're sinking ships? Well, it kind of points to the fact that the United States was using civilian ships to transport weapons. And to Germany, that kind of made them, not civilian ships, but war ships. So Germany threw down a rule and said, any ship we see that is flying certain flags, we will sink it. So that's what they did. They sunk the Lusitania. But through yellow journalism, they didn't report that it was carrying weapons. It reported that it killed 128 Americans. And that really ticked off Americans. And we're like, let's support war. Or, one more action and oh boy, we're going to come and get you. The Zimmerman note. The Zimmerman note was a separate incident. It's kind of funny. Britain was monitoring our communications. Britain couldn't admit that they were monitoring our communications. And they came across a message that said from Germany to Mexico, because we were occupying Mexico. Hey, Mexico, this is from Germany. Hey, Mexico, if you declare war on the United States and fight the United States, when we win Europe, we'll come over and help you defeat the United States and give back all the land you lost in the Mexican-American War. You can take back California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas. Sound cool? Cool. It didn't come from like German leadership. It was just some advisor who sent the message. It was completely stupid of him to send the message. And Britain knew the message was sent. So they created this whole fake thing of they captured a German officer with the note and they reported it to the United States. And after that, it was on like Donkey Kong. We declared war on Germany and went over and helped Britain and France. Total war. Total war is, before industrialization, 1,000 years ago, you'd live in a town and your husband may have a shield and a sword. And when it came time, your husband would go off and you'd wave goodbye and just hope he came back. Total war, because of industrialization, you wouldn't do that with your husband. Your husband would go off to war and you would take his job to produce war material. So that is total war, where the entire country is devoted to producing material for war. The Sedition and Espionage Act, we'll talk about that. We've already talked about that, but we'll go over it again. And then Wilson's 14 points, and I got a video on that. We'll talk about it. After the war was over, Wilson came up with a plan for peace. Let me get rid of this. Wilson came up with a plan for peace, but Europe didn't buy into it, and it failed. And what ended up taking its place was the Treaty of Versailles, and that really ruined things in Europe. It wasn't the sole contributor, but it was one of the big contributing factors to the rise of Hitler in World War II. We'll go over this in class, and then we'll go over this in class as well. And that pretty much ends the lecture. Talk to you later.